Buckle up for AEC Trailblazers, the Founders Files, where we crack open the stories of the brightest minds in the AEC startup scene. Forget institutional pitches. We're diving deep into the real personal journeys of these industry disruptors. Get ready for some casual chats firsthand.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of the AEC Trailblazers podcast, where we interview amazing founders from the tech scene. Today with us, we have Ken Fichtler. He's the founder and CEO of Gaize, a company pioneering objective impairment detection through advanced ocular technology. With a background in business management from Montana State University, really jealous here that he lives in Montana because that's one place that I love. And he studied international studies at Al Agwain University. I hope I pronounced that right. Ken brings a strategic vision that bridges business innovation and emerging safety technologies. A natural leader, he has successfully built and led multidisciplinary teams, including Montana's first TEDx event. At Gaize, he is redefining workplace safety, enabling companies to maintain a safe environment while embracing a modern workforce. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Did I miss something on your bio?
No, I mean, we can go as deep or as shallow as you like, but that was a good overview.
Yeah, it's impressive bio, man. But what took you into tech, man? How you ended up deciding, like, first I'm gonna go into tech, and secondly I'm gonna go through the pain of have my own company?
Yeah, it's not a journey for everyone, and I question my sanity every once in a while. It's easily the hardest thing I've ever done, building this company, but it's great that it feels worth it. So really, the way I got into this, I was the director of economic development for the state of Montana. And in that role, I became exposed to the problem of the lack of a device that could check for active impairment from cannabis as well as other drugs, although cannabis is really the thing that started the company. At the time, Montana was a medical cannabis state, and we were considering becoming a recreational access state. And so part of my job as director of economic development was, what is the impact of that going to be to the state's economy, to the business community, and that sort of bridged into law enforcement in a certain way. And so what I was doing is I was just trying to understand, learn from states that had done this previously. And what became clear was that, the sky doesn't fall. This is broadly a good thing for states. And the one challenge that was sort of raised from my peers in other states was that there was no device that could check for impairment. And so that really struck me as both a really interesting problem and an important piece of technology that needed to exist if we were going to have this legalization effort succeed ultimately. When I dug deeper into it and started to understand the problem, and my intention was just make an angel investment into whatever company was going to do this right. And obviously there's a huge opportunity here. And so in looking around, I couldn't find anybody that was doing it right. And that really led me down the path of what does right even look like. And that sort of surfaced these eye movement tests that we're now using in our product today, and really led me towards building what is, I believe, the first defensible impairment detection technology that exists in the world.
Interesting and impressive. But by any chance you have the numbers of how big the problem is? Like, because that's something that when you were speaking to me is like, how can you speak in terms of, I don't know, numbers of people? How big is the problem?
Yeah, great question. And it's very difficult to quantify because the way that cannabis works in the body is that when cannabis is used, its metabolites will linger for a very, very long time. And that's why we've all heard, THC tests can be positive for 3 weeks after it was last used. And what that really ends up meaning is that it's very difficult to assign cause and effect to cannabis impairment directly without some admission from the person who is using cannabis. So this is present in all the statistics that you find. It's really a confounding issue, but you can look at some things, like we've got 24 states with recreational access to cannabis today. There's a very large amount of cannabis that's sold. There's something like 20%, I believe, somewhere in that neighborhood of all cannabis sold is in edible form, which is very confounding to workplaces, in particular when they can't, there's no odor to really draw a conclusion from. About 20% of Americans use cannabis in the last year. And that number is, of course, higher amongst blue-collar demographics, which broadly occupy the trades and construction. So we know the problem is extremely pervasive, but it's very difficult to actually get a handle on. The other thing that's been a frustration to me on statistics is OSHA does not report kind of the root cause of an incident. They have a recordable and a database of the things that happened and companies that where those occurred, but you can't then go search the OSHA database and find out, yeah, this one was due to impairment, which is a total miss in my estimation. It's really a travesty that we don't have access to that sort of root cause information.
That's incredible.
Yeah, totally bizarre.
Believe that, accident, check if there are drugs involved, and then report it. Like, you can anonymize it, right? But at least show the numbers. It's just
the same disconnect exists in law enforcement data. If you dig into law enforcement data, you can't find out, of what portion of traffic stops that were impairment related did the person actually get convicted of some impairment related offense. That data doesn't exist for the public either. So again, very difficult to quantify exactly, other than we know this is the most commonly used drug. More Americans used cannabis daily than alcohol last year. So that's a very interesting change in statistic.
Really?
Yeah. It's becoming, virtually ubiquitous, certainly among certain demographics. And that, of course, is creating these downstream impacts for businesses.
Interesting. But you mentioned that with your technology, you cannot only detect cannabis, but you can also detect like other drugs as well. Which other drugs can you detect as well?
Yeah, good question. So the technology is based on these foundational tests called drug recognition expert tests. And these are the same tests that law enforcement has used for about 45 years. So what I did when I was kind of considering this product and how to create a defensible product that could detect impairment, these were really the tests that rose to the surface. They have the most sort of scientific backing behind them. And what I wanted to do is automate them and find some portion of those tests that could be automated. And so the eye movement tests rose to the forefront. And so what our product is basically an automated version of those tests, which we run in a VR headset. And that VR headset allows us to very precisely control the background distractions, the amount of light entering the eyes, the test stimulus, all that. And then we can also capture very high resolution eye movement data using embedded eye tracking sensors. And that data then gets analyzed by our algorithms to look for the signs of impairment that we know should be present for each of these categories of drugs. What's really great about these tests is they were designed to look for impairment from every category of drug. And so each category of drug has a unique way in which it impacts eye movement, which allows us to then hone in on those indicators. And so today, our product can detect impairment from cannabinoids broadly. So not just delta-9 THC like most THC tests, but delta-8 THC, delta-10, HHC, all these synthetic and semi-synthetic cannabinoids, alcohol and other depressant drugs, CNS stimulants, opiates, and that includes fentanyl and nitazines, dissociative anesthetics, including ketamine, and most psychedelics. I say most because that's an incredibly broad category with a lot of different compounds in it, literally thousands of different compounds in it, and not all impact the body in exactly the same way. And it is extremely difficult to capture data for people who are using novel psychedelics, I'll say. So there's a lot of exploration left to be done in the psychedelic space, but our product is effective for the kind of most common.
Interesting. I'm not sure I can ask this question, but I will go for it, and then you can tell me if I'm okay or not. But how is the testing for this? How on earth do you validate this?
Yeah, it's an incredibly challenging task. One of the things that became clear immediately was that if we're going to launch a product, we need to do clinical trials, and we need to have actual clinical level data that can validate our effectiveness at detecting these things. And so what we've done is sort of capture data from certain substances in a clinical trial setting, and then other substances sort of, I'll say not in a formal setting. And, as an example, maybe go to a festival or something and find somebody who's on MDMA, and then you can test their eyes and you get some like foundational data for your models that way, but it's not, defensible clinical trial data. And so in order to do that, you've got to actually do a clinical trial. So today we've done clinical trials for cannabis and alcohol. We have clinical trials in process for a broad variety of psychotropic prescription drugs. So things like benzodiazepines, ADHD stimulant medication, et cetera, basically anything that's prescribable by a psychiatrist. And then we also have a trial ongoing right now for cannabis edibles. And we're working on pulling together clinical trials for opiates, methamphetamine, fatigue, and drug combinations, which are potentially, there's something called the entourage effect, where two drugs in combination can have a somewhat unique impairing effect relative to those drugs used in isolation. And so we need to study those combinations as well. And so this research is very much ongoing, and we're blazing new paths all the time. But it is a challenging exercise, particularly when there's, essentially no government money that's going into this space, which is a whole other conversation, but totally insane.
Yeah, no, I agree. And let's be clear on something. Like, let's say that I take a drug that it's a new drug, completely new drug, but it makes me, I don't know, dizzy, or it makes me not like, it will put me in a state that I'm not suitable for, I don't know, operating machinery or drive a truck, or like, even if your technology had never been tested on that specific drug, if I have certain, I don't know, certain things are happening in my body, it's going to detect it anyway, right?
Yep.
It's just going to say, I don't know which drug you're on, but you're not fit for this.
So what our product will actually say is we recommend a confirmatory test for, whatever category we think we're seeing. And that's a really unique aspect of our product, where we can start to hone in on the category of drug that's causing that impairment. And so, really that's a unique aspect of our technology relative to a chemical drug test. So chemical drug test is looking for only those chemicals that it was designed for. As an example, if you design the test to look for heroin, it's not going to find fentanyl. And that's a big problem, right? Because fentanyl is very commonly used and abused. It killed over 100,000 Americans last year. And the common panels for drug tests are not inclusive of fentanyl even today, which is another huge problem. Our technology, in that it can look at how the body is responding to those drugs and to that category of substance, is not sort of limited by the chemicals, but is only limited by the impact to the body. So since opiates all cause very similar impacts to the body, we're going to detect opiate impairment and be able to report that to our customer.
Oh, that makes sense. And I know that the technology, it was created specifically to make sure people are fit or not to do a job, right?
Right.
But I'm just curious, and like, how conscious I need to be to use the device and you test me. Like I'm just going off the rails, and then just thinking, like, even hospitals using this, but like, that's not even possible at all, or would
It really depends. The person needs to be able to follow a stimulus on a screen, which is basically a little red ball that moves across a black background. That's the extent of the difficulty of our test. But, at extreme levels of impairment, that's not possible. And, functionally, that person needs to get medical attention and not probably could not, go through our test. That person is also not likely to be the person who's, on a job site trying to, function or do their job. And so the vast majority of the time, our customers are finding someone who took an edible at lunch, they come back, they're behaving in an odd manner, and then they go through our test and we can find impairment. it's not typically someone who's like passed out on the job site. If the person is unconscious, they can't go through our test.
I love how you put it. Like typically, it's not, but I bet it happened. Yeah. 0 point.
I mean, the number of stories that we have at this point is just crazy. But a good example that came up recently is there's a construction customer in South Texas, and they had somebody who was apparently using a synthetic cannabinoid and had a total like sort of a mental break on the job site and was unable to function, was sort of writhing on the ground. That person couldn't go through our test, but they needed medical attention and they were obviously having a hard time with something, and so it wasn't like there was some big mystery.
Yeah. You don't need the beer headset to know a guy's having a mental breakdown. Yeah, no.
If they're so impaired they can't go through our test, then you've got a pretty clear answer.
Yeah. That's a good test. It's like, can you put your beer headsets? No. Okay, you cannot work.
On the other side though too, we test people that are on opiates every once in a while, and those people will commonly nod off during the test, and so you've got another indicator there that this person is not fit for duty.
No, that makes sense. And now that you bring a valid point of that, you have tested with so many companies out there and so many construction companies as well. And no need to say the location or the company, but have you had surprises when you implement this on companies where, I don't know, the owner of the company might say, you know what, I'm not going to find anything here, and you end up finding people who are not fit for the job?
Oh yeah. I mean, both sides, right? Where we have people who think they don't have a problem and it comes back they have a big problem. And on the other side, people who are like, we're seeing some things that we think are impairment related, and they adopt our technology, and suddenly all those problems go away because now you've got a device that can actually check for impairment. And the sort of deterrent effect of that device is that people stop showing up to work high. So that's sort of the impact that we see most often. There are the occasional, ones that, use some substance they think they're going to skate through on, and it turns out poorly for them.
Yeah, well, I bet those are the least common cases. People who think that, like, they're not going to find me. I'm going to put those beer glasses and...
Yeah, we actually get emails every once in a while from somebody saying, hey, I want to test your system and I want to beat it. And, if you're at a level of impairment where you're functionally impaired, you're experiencing acute impairment, we're going to find it.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Maybe you take an edible and you right away you put your beer glasses. Sure, you're gonna beat the system, but because you're still fit, just wait until the system
like drinking a beer and then immediately taking a breathalyzer. You're gonna probably not find much evidence of impairment, but once that actually gets in your bloodstream, now you've got a higher level of impairment that's being found on the breathalyzer.
And how fast does it take? I put the beer glasses, and how much time does it take to get the
test takes about 5 minutes to run, and then we have about 30 seconds of processing time. So, typically in the course of 6 minutes, we've got an answer, which is, I'll note, significantly faster than any chemical test on the market.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
other than a breathalyzer, breathalyzers are of course instant, but if you're doing even a saliva test, those are 15-minute tests on the short end, and the lab confirmed ones are obviously significantly longer.
Yeah, breathalyzers are only for alcohol, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So
there was a startup that was trying to do a breath test for THC, but they failed last year after raising an unbelievable amount of money.
Really?
That's a very difficult challenge. There's 21 million times less THC in a breath sample than there is alcohol for sort of an equivalent level of impairment. So that's it's an extremely challenging technical problem.
That makes sense. It was not a startup called Fentanyl, right?
Hound Labs was the name of that one. Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting approach, and it's too bad it didn't work out. But there are some other startups that are trying that path. Ultimately, though, even if that device was marketed and commercialized, it's not an impairment test. That's a recent use test. So to the extent that matters to businesses, and it does more and more. There's a really key distinction there, and that is, there's no chemical test out there that can show impairment for THC. That doesn't exist.
True. It would tell you if you have THC, but if you're fit or not, right?
Right. So it'll find out if you previously used THC with some level, some impairment or some detection window. So for oral fluid tests, which are the most commonly used now, that's going to be 24 to 48 hours, kind of depending on how much you used and what form. And then urinalysis tests will be positive for about 3 to 4 weeks after the last use. Blood tests is about 7 days. Hair tests about 3 months.
Yeah, and you take the test and you get the result the next day. That might be a little bit.
Yeah, that's a problem, right?
Happens,
I mean, you got somebody sitting on the sidelines for that time who you're paying, and you're still not finding out if that person was impaired or if they, smoked a joint over the weekend and were responsible in their use, but you're still finding that evidence of use. So there's a lot of workers in legal cannabis states that get penalized for this all the time, where they use safely and responsibly what is now a legal substance, and they end up getting, losing their job or being disciplined at work because of that action. And that's objectively unfair. And courts are starting to really recognize that. And so are state laws. California adopted a law last year called AB 2188 that really precludes employers from taking adverse action based on a metabolite-based drug test.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It's like you can do whatever you want in your private life, but and you cannot know the difference by doing one of those tests, right? But I'm just curious. The technology is amazing, by the way.
Thanks.
For me, it's amazing. But do you think? And I'm getting ambitious here, but do you think it's gonna evolve in a way that maybe it's just gonna work with cameras in the future? I don't know, or something like that, where you will be able to track people all the time on a passive wave and not on making them wear a VR headset? Or do you think that that's even possible?
It may be. And so, I think in order to get there, we need like tens or hundreds of thousands of data of like high quality clinical level data points that we can look at. And that's, an extremely expensive proposition that would probably cost, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not clear to us at this point if you could take the same sort of indicators of impairment and put that technology into a smartphone. And maybe, I'm not going to say never, but as of now, our headset captures a accuracy and a frequency of data that is impossible for a smartphone to capture. So if cameras get a lot better on smartphones, and obviously that's the trajectory it's moving, then maybe someday. But that day is certainly not today, and it's certainly not anytime soon. The other challenge is, if you're talking about like in-car monitoring, you have to be at a level of accuracy that is, virtually 100%. Like if you are even 99% accurate, 1 in every 100 people who tries to start their car is not going to be able to. And that's an unacceptable outcome. So you have to really be at like several 9s percentile accuracy in order to be at a level that is going to be acceptable. And, today, alcohol breathalyzers are not that accurate. No drug test is that accurate. Our technology is about 98% accurate. So it's not, we're just not at that point today.
No, it makes sense. I think something like that happened with Volvo, right? They were adding something that blocked your car, but it was not precise enough, and it was pain in the ass, because it's like you said, just 1 in 100. It's million people that cannot turn on their cars every day. It's right. A lot of
and you can imagine like the safety incidents that could be created by that, right? Let's say you're trying to get your pregnant wife to the hospital and you can't start your car because you're fatigued. Well, that's a major problem, and that's not okay. So are we going to be at this level of accuracy anytime soon? I don't think so. But that's obviously a future that I would love to work towards, and certainly if I look at our sort of 10-year vision, I would love to be there.
Yeah, it will also raise the question, like, if we are still going to have people driving cars and
Yeah.
trucks and in 10 or 20 years. So like,
Yeah,
who
that
knows?
seems
People are still going to do risky jobs for sure, but driving, maybe not.
yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
So that's something that we need to take into account. But no, it's just so interesting, and I'm curious on when you implement this technology, right? How they they only use it when they see someone that they think is not fit, or there are other companies using this as, you know what, everybody needs to take the test every day on the job site, for example.
It depends on how the company wants to deploy it. Most of our customers today use it in response to an incident, or as an example, somebody has an accident at the job site, they'll go through a Gaize test first. Similarly, reasonable suspicion, if somebody is suspected of being impaired on a job site, they go through our test first. Some of our customers are also doing pre-employment testing. So, this is kind of a way for companies to screen out people who just fundamentally are so hopelessly addicted to something they can't show up to, a drug test sober. So that's one use case. That's pretty uncommon, but it does happen. And then where we're really trying to push our customers is towards doing some surveillance screening or random screening, where they'll test, maybe 10% of their workforce when they start shift every day. So doing that, you can really have a very, very high level of certainty that your people are showing up safe and sober. And, again, the deterrent effect of doing some screening like that would be very high. So people are able to, the company's able to be efficient with how many units they have and what, frequency people go through that screening, but also make sure that their workplace is safe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I bet if you start doing random tests, like you can even have VR headsets that don't even work, and you're gonna lower their amperes anyway because people are gonna be afraid of it. But still, I remember that I used to work at a construction site, right, for a couple of years, and we got random tests. This was in Vegas, so it's really common there. And every time I had the test, I was like, I didn't do drugs, so I didn't have a problem. But I was imagining nobody's gonna fall for this because everybody knows this is a random test, and
yeah.
And every once in a while, you get someone kicked off of the job site because they were on drugs. So it was like, what? This is gonna happen to you, you still do it?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why these tests exist, right? Because people continue to do the drugs. And when companies are faced with this challenge of legal cannabis, it's just a perplexing issue for them, right? Because you've got a legal substance that people want to use and are using, and then you've got this mandate to keep your workplace safe, and it's a really perplexing challenge. And that's, most often that's where we end up getting adopted.
Interesting. What's like, we're speaking about construction, but which industry is using your headsets the most?
By both sort of covered a number of employees and, number of job sites protected, manufacturing is our biggest, but construction is hot on its heels. We've actually had more adoption in the construction space. I won't say more, but probably equivalent adoption in the construction space in the last 6 months. And that's been a big change. Construction has historically been, not our biggest industry, and it's definitely growing very rapidly. The other industries we work in are oil and gas, mining, logistics, really anything that's safety sensitive, particularly in states where cannabis is legal or where they're having problems with impairment.
Yeah, well, at this point in the US, even if the states are legal or not, you have the problem everywhere. It's
Every time we talk to somebody in a state that's still illegal, I have to remind them, I can probably go to the gas station right next door to your facility and buy Delta 8 THC. I can also order that off the internet. And so the idea that you're somehow protected from cannabinoid impairment is laughable. And when states consider legalizing cannabis, the reality is typically you have a lot of cannabis in the state already, but it's untaxed. You don't know the magnitude of what you're dealing with. And, the people who are going to smoke weed are going to smoke weed at the end of the day. This has never been a challenging substance to acquire, and it's even less so than ever today. So, companies really need to recognize that this is a very commonly used substance, and they need to have a way to protect their workforce from impairment. We just had a new customer join this week, actually, where somebody cut their finger off while they were high, and now they want to solve the problem. And my hope is always that people will solve the problem before it gets to that point. Having somebody have a life-changing injury on the job site is not the point at which you want to start thinking about this.
Yeah, that point is too late.
Yeah.
And do you also get the numbers on percentage-wise on the drugs that people are taking the most on the job site? Like it's cannabis, or like you detect, I don't know, 90% being alcohol, or 90% being, I don't know, what other drugs people are taking on the job site?
It's cannabis and alcohol are the two big ones for sure. Benzodiazepines are somewhat common, occasionally opiates. And then after that would be, stimulants as a category, but there's probably an equal mix of like meth and cocaine are the two like most problematic ones.
Interesting. Well, it might be, I guess, a relationship on how well can you function, because like maybe, I don't know, cannabis, you can smoke a joint and you can be fine. But I bet I don't even know much about drugs, but I mean, if you inject something that it's really powerful, you cannot even walk, like you cannot get to the job site anyway. So I guess it's related with that as well. Or even if you show to the job site, you're going to be in such a bad state that everybody's going to realize, and you need the drug test for that.
Have you heard of kratom?
Kratom?
Yeah.
What's that?
Kratom is an herb from Southeast Asia that acts on the opioid receptors in the brain, and it's available at most gas stations. And so this is something that's actually used very commonly in construction sites because it's not detectable on standard drug panels. It's a mild pain reliever, so you can kind of have a little pain relief, as well as it's sort of mildly euphoric, and so people feel pretty good when they're on it. And so that gets it's difficult to quantify the magnitude of that problem in the construction industry, but we know it's very common, and people are increasingly concerned about that, particularly in urban environments for some reason, it seems. We actually talked to a construction company who shockingly has not purchased yet from us, but they had somebody overdose on kratom on their job site.
Really?
And yeah, they had to call the ambulance, Narcan the guy, whole nine. And, the guy was like, oopsie, I guess I took too much today. But
it's legal, or it's like, it's a over the counter thing, right?
Yeah, it's just over the counter. I mean, literally walk into a gas station, ask them if they have kratom, and if they don't have it, there's probably a 50% chance they'll have it. And if they don't, they'll know who does.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's only a few states that have banned kratom completely. I'll say it's like Wisconsin and Idaho or something.
I mean, technically you can get sleeping pills, and if you get sleeping pills and go to the job site, you're not fit for the job either. So that meaning that. But no, I've not heard about that. It's just for pain?
It's sort of marketed as a pain reliever, but really I think it's more often like the euphoric and impairing effects that people are after.
Kind of like Oxycodone, right? Like started that way.
Yeah, it's like a
mild
opiate, really.
Yeah, it's just insane. No, I didn't know. It's just those kind of things that, and you guys can detect that. Like, I mean,
we can detect opioid impairment broadly, and so kratom, it falls within that category.
Oh, bad news for guys taking that on the job site.
Well,
you feel hated sometimes, or
I feel hated a lot. Yeah, and that's kind of crazy too, because fundamentally, if you're not a bad actor, what we're doing is good for you. And by that I mean, if you are safely and responsibly using a substance on your personal time and having that not impact your work, then you have nothing to fear. And if you're not doing that, then you're fundamentally endangering the lives of your coworkers, and that's not acceptable. So The hate that we get is most often from the cannabis community, and it's most often sort of low understanding and the assumption that we're just bad guys out there trying to catch people smoking weed. When the reality is we're trying to provide, and we are providing, the most fair and the most objective way to check for cannabinoid impairment, which is actually going to maintain their ability to use the substance and keep their job. I mean, if you smoke a joint over the weekend, you go to work on Monday, you shouldn't lose your job for that. And right now that's happening all the time. And we're able to prevent that from happening through a 5-minute eye test. So I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, it's more fair than a drug test. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because like it's either they losing your job on an unfair way or just wearing a beer headset and showing that they're fit to work that day.
Yeah, and the law enforcement side too. I mean, people are getting falsely accused of impaired driving because they have THC in their saliva when they're sober. And that's a terrible criminal justice outcome and is obviously not what any state wanted when they legalized cannabis, but that happens constantly. And so really, law enforcement needs to be adopting impairment testing as well and not just relying on oral fluid, which is, again, not an impairment test.
That's a good question. Do you feel eventually police will use your devices?
Yeah, we've made inroads with law enforcement. Our units have been used by some very large and notable departments as sort of a pilot basis. And what we need to have happen is we need to have states adopt impairment detection as a standard. There's organizations out there that sort of, protect the processes that law enforcement use to look for impaired driving. The International Association of Chiefs of Police is the primary one. And, they really need to, I think, get with the times and recognize that impairment from cannabis is a growing issue and that the tests that law enforcement have today are inadequate. So, I mean, everybody wants, I think, good and fair criminal justice outcomes. What's happening today is not that. So whether it's our device or another, it needs to happen. And I really hope that they'll start taking this issue seriously.
No, absolutely. And nowadays it's a little bit stupid because most of the times it's just a breathalyzer and that just checks alcohol, but the guy might not be in shape to drive. And
totally. And cannabis is an incredibly subtle substance that is not easily recognized using the standardized field sobriety tests that all the kind of patrol officers use. Those are really designed to look for alcohol impairment. And so something like cannabis, you can be totally unsafe to drive on cannabis and still pass those tests, relatively easily. There's a study that came out in 2023 that showed a 49% false positive rate using the standardized field sobriety test to look for cannabinoid impairment. So that's a terrible outcome. And you may as well just flip a coin at that point.
Yes.
You have to do better. We have to do better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe, who knows, this is the way. And next time you get pulled over, it's going to be police coming with a VR headset and it's like, hey, put these glasses on. And I also feel it's more fair because police stops you and they're going to do a manual test or not a manual test, a test that they will check on how they think you are. It's not even a partial thing. It's subjective and not objective thing. So I think this is more of a proof and it can get recorded. So if something happens, the proof is there that you were in shape or you were not in shape.
Yeah, and this is illustrative too for, I think, workplaces where you've got people who have reasonable suspicion training and they're supposed to identify people who are experiencing impairment before problems happen. And what that study shows us is that humans are not terribly good at doing this for certain substances, at least. Maybe alcohol is very easy to detect, and it certainly is a lot easier than cannabis. And certain other drug categories are very easy to detect, but cannabis is subtle. And relying on a human wandering around the facility with other jobs that they're supposed to be doing simultaneously, it's probably not, a really, good or objective way of doing this work.
No, absolutely not. But I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to take more of your time because I make a lot of questions and what you guys are doing it's amazing. So you're making job sites more safe. So thanks for that, Ken.
Yeah, my pleasure. And it's been really exciting seeing the growth we've had in the construction space. We've got some of the top construction companies in the world using our product today, and a lot more looking at doing so in the near future. So it's happening. I'm really excited to see the traction we're getting amongst construction companies.
Before we wrap this up, just a final question. If someone wants to implement this, like they can use any type of beer headset, they have to purchase it from you guys, or how does that work?
Yeah, the unit is a kind of specialized piece of hardware. So it has very high precision eye tracking sensors that are embedded in it. And so we use one piece of hardware in particular that has to come from us. There may be other headsets in the future that we can utilize, but for now it's just one unit, and we install our software on it at our facility, and then we ship it to a customer.
All right. And before we say goodbye to each other, can you tell everybody where they can know more about Gaize or about yourself?
You bet. So our website is Gaize, Gaize.ai, Gaize.ai. We are, on all the social media services. At Gaize Safety is our handle, Gaize Safety. And I'm reachable at ken@gaize.ai if you want to send me a note. Would love to hear from anybody with any questions.
All right. Thanks so much for your time. It was great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope I will see more of your devices in the construction sites in the near future. All right.
You bet.
All right. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Thanks to our listeners. If you like this content, you can find past and upcoming episodes in ascworks.everse.com and at all of our Everse social media. We'd love to hear from you and recommendations for new content, so leave us a DM and we'll make sure to catch it.